Today on Inside Utah Politics, the latest in the fight over medical marijuana. The state legislature following up on a promise to replace Proposition 2 with a new bill. Political columnist Robert Gerke with the Salt Lake Tribune is here to weigh in. And people in Utah and around the world, for that matter, pausing to pay tribute to former President George H.W. Bush this week. We take a look back at his legacy and his connection to the Beehive State.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Good Sunday morning, and thanks so much for joining us for Inside Utah Politics. I'm Glenn Mills. We begin this morning with Salt Lake Tribune political columnist Robert Gerke. What a week. Robert, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for being here.
Hey, happy to be here.
Let's start off with the Utah Medical Cannabis Act. We knew the legislature was going to address this going into the election because they made it known beforehand. You argue that there are some good parts of this compromise bill.
Yeah,
what are those?
I mean, a lot of people are upset about it because they said, well, the people had their chance to speak. The legislature hadn't acted for years, and the people finally took control and then got the legs cut out from under them, and I get that. That's a valid point. There are some improvements in the bill, though. There was some drafting errors that created a gap there's a protection in the bill for people who possess medical marijuana before it's available from the state, and there was a gap in there where people would not be protected for a span of about 7 months, and so they improved that. They restored some language that allows terminally ill patients and patients in hospice to get access to medical marijuana that was taken out inadvertently in Prop 2. And so, you know, and I think the most important thing is that there's now a clear path to get it there, because if Prop 2 had been allowed to stand, you would have ended up with a situation where the opponents to Prop 2, they had already filed lawsuits. There was going to be resistance from the legislature, resistance from the governor in implementing it. And so I think by and large, we now have a situation where we can actually see this to start moving forward. And the governor's proposed putting $5 million into getting this off the ground and running. And so there is now a clear pathway to actually getting medical marijuana to the people who have needed it for years.
Yeah, let's think about that. I want to get more into the points that you make in your article, but let's think about that for a minute. In the state of Utah, medical marijuana is now legal.
It's kind of mind-blowing, because even as recently as March, there were bills that were being proposed. Going back all the way to 2015, there have been bills that have been proposed and never really gotten serious consideration. Right. You know, the closest we came maybe was the Mark Madsen bill, and the legislature had taken incremental steps to try to address some of the specific populations. But now we have an overwhelming majority of the public, an overwhelming majority of the legislature saying, we want medical marijuana, this is the program we're going to have. And it's a remarkable distance to have traveled in legislative time, at least, over that short year-long period.
Yeah, I mean, there are states in our country that still don't have legal medical marijuana in the state.
Yeah, we're at about 2/3 now of the country, and I think we're going to keep moving in that direction. But you wouldn't have expected Utah to be, you know, at least in that sort of middle pack.
Interesting point. You bring up Senator Madsen's bill. When they were talking about this compromise bill, he actually came up to the Capitol and he said, look, if I would have had this compromise in front of me 3 or 4 years ago, how long ago it was, slipping my mind, but he said, I would have been on board with this back then.
Yeah, and I think that's very telling that this is not a bad bill. The frustration that Senator Madsen had when he came up to the Capitol was that the church had never engaged. They had blocked his bill, opposed it, kept it from going forward, and really kind of had killed it, basically. And so, but they wouldn't engage in negotiate. And I think what it took for the church to come to the table and the other parties to come to the table and actually start talking about brass tacks is this threat that Proposition 2 was going to pass. And so the voters of Utah played an enormous role in moving the ball from A to Z and getting us to some place where we actually have a program.
Very true. That was part of his frustration when he was talking is, look, we could have done this years ago. We didn't have to wait until now to do it.
And put the time and the expense and the money, and people for those years could have been getting access to the medicine that they need.
You and I were both at the Capitol on Monday when the legislature passed this bill, and when it passed in the House, people left frustrated, again, understandably. Some pretty colorful language that we can't repeat here on this program. But you make another interesting point in your article, and that being that Prop 2 would have failed if the compromise were not on the table.
Yeah, I mean, there was a big split in the patient advocate community over whether or not they should even be coming to the table and negotiating. They thought that, you know, based on the early polling, they held all the cards, and that, you know, Prop 2 is going to pass and they don't need to negotiate. That's a position of weakness, basically. But we really saw the numbers, the polling numbers, drop precipitously when the LDS Church formally weighed in against the initiative, and we saw the margin, the final margin was, I believe, 3.5% or something like that that it passed by. Given more time, a couple million more dollars, I think it's pretty clear that this could have been defeated, and then there's no impetus, there's no, you know, incentive for the opponents of medical marijuana to come to the table and negotiate. So I think it was the right decision ultimately for these people to come to the table and work out a plan that, yeah, again, like I said, can be implemented without resistance, and you know, get what they could get at the negotiating table.
One last point, it is still a work in progress, and we have to wait to see if the state can really deliver on this central fill idea. That's
sort of the biggest question, I think, in my mind, is that the whole thing is contingent on this central fill pharmacy, which has never been tried in any other state. It has some upside, I think, because if it does work out, you have you get the prescriptions filled at the central fill pharmacy, and then they go out to county health departments, and that means people in rural Utah are going to have access to this as well. If it doesn't work, then they have to fall back on these this parallel private pharmacy or private dispensary model, and there's only 7 of those in the bill. So if the central fill pharmacy doesn't pan out, those private pharmacies become much more important, and they're going to probably have to expand the numbers. So that's really, I think, the biggest question hanging over this now is, can we actually get this up and running in a way that serves the public, or is it going to be sort of a state liquor store model? It's going to be, you know, bureaucratic, heavy, and restrictive. So that's something that we're going to have to continue to follow.
All right, and we'll continue to do that. There's so much more we could get into on this, but I want to get to another topic, and that being hate crimes legislation. I want to pull up this picture right here. This is 18-year-old Luis Gustavo Lopez. He was attacked at Lopez Tires, a family-owned business, with a 3-foot pole. The suspect allegedly yelling out things like, "I hate Mexicans, I'm here to kill a Mexican." You make the argument that if this isn't a hate crime, what is?
Yeah, and we've had this debate up at the Capitol for the last several years, where people have been, where Senator Urquhart first, Senator Thatcher after that, has been trying to get the state to a place where we have a workable hate crimes law. Right now, prosecutors essentially cannot charge a hate crime in this case. And it's gaining national attention. You know, the New York Times has written about it, Huffington Post, other publications are picking up on this. Every year it's been blocked. Senator Urquhart, when it failed initially, when he was sponsoring it, attributed that to the LDS Church because they had passed this anti-discrimination law statewide, but they said they didn't want to do anything else that might address LGBT issues. And so that bill died. And since then, the church has been silent on it. And it hasn't been able to get a hearing. And I think that this might be the impetus we need, unfortunately, you know, a tragic incident, but it might be the impetus for the state to actually come back and start addressing this.
You've gone to the church and asked them for comment. What have you heard from them?
Every year I've asked them for a comment because their initial explanation was that they didn't want to upset the balance. You know, they wanted to give it time to, this Anti-Discrimination Act time to play out. But every year since then, I've asked them, and they've said they're not going to comment any further. And so, you know, the silence then implies to the legislators that that is still the status quo, that they are not supportive of this. I'm not sure that that's actually the case, but it would be, if they would even come out and say we don't oppose the bill, I think it would give it a huge boost in terms of getting it across the finish line. Senator Thatcher is going to be running it again this year. He's having meetings.
Couldn't even get it out into committee last year.
Couldn't get it into committee last year. The argument from Senator Stuart Adams, who was the majority whip, now is going to be the Senate president, was that it just didn't have the votes in the Senate to pass. We'll see if that changes this year. We've got some new senators, and maybe that's changed. Maybe this incident gives them a little more incentive to do it. But it's still going to be hard, and I think until the LDS Church comes out and with a statement that's something to the effect of we're not going to oppose this, it's going to be much harder to do. Sim Gill, I talked to Sim Gill, who's Salt Lake County District Attorney. He's incredibly frustrated with this because he's been said for 18 years that the state needs to get a workable hate crimes law, and over the last several years, you know, has been advocating for it aggressively, and now he has this case in his lap that he can't give an adequate hate crime charge to. The man is charged with, felony assault, but
Sure.
there should be a hate crimes enhancement, and it's just not a tool in his toolbox.
And we certainly saw the frustration in Senator Urquhart back in 2016.
Yeah.
He came out firing after his bill was killed.
Well, he was really upset because he had sort of shepherded through this anti-discrimination bill and then felt like the church had then turned around and cut the legs out from under him on hate crimes, and he felt like it was disingenuous. And I kind of get that. You don't balance protecting one group against discrimination by taking away protections or not protecting other groups from potentially violent crimes. And it's important to note, I think, that this would apply to everybody. Everybody's got a gender, everybody's got a race.
Even the LDS
The
church.
LDS church would be protected by this. If a couple missionaries are beaten up going down the street, or if a church is vandalized or firebombed, the LDS church would be protected by this just as much as anybody else. So it's a little puzzling why they are at least even silent on it.
All right, we'll wait and see how that happens. In the meantime, how can our viewers connect with you?
I'm at sltrib.com, or else you can follow me on Twitter at Robert Gerke.
All right, appreciate your time. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Glenn.
Still to come on Inside Utah Politics, the Supreme Court wants to hear from the state of Utah on the GOP's lawsuit against SB 54. Our panel will discuss what that means and the impact of the lawsuit within the party. But first, remembering 41, how the world came together to pay final respects to former President George H.W. Bush right after the break.